Deck building has been a common topic on this channel so far, but I've been mostly looking at it from the perspective of the player. The perspective of a competitor, the perspective of someone only with access to what they are given. But today, we will be approaching this topic from a different perspective, from the developer perspective. When designing a card, developers have a lot of different things to factor in. A card can't just be made good, there are a lot of variables and concepts that have to be considered. The cost of the card, the rarity of the card, the power budget the format is aiming for, the point here is lots to think about. One of these concepts is the archetype, cards that are designed to work with other specific cards. And archetypes exist for a reason, either to create additional restrictions for powerful cards, or to create synergies between existing ones. Want to make a card work better with another? Slap on an additional positive effect that only works or benefits a specific other card. Is a card too strong on its own? Restrict its effect, or restrict the cards you can play with it to make it less versatile. And that second part does make sense. Strong cards are cool and are exciting to print and play, but in order for them to exist, they have to have a downside. A restriction somewhere that keeps the power level reasonable. But this isn't always the case, we'll get to it in a little bit. But with this thought process here comes a conundrum. Restrictions on cards like this does limit the way you can play, but they really hit you in the deck building. And if there are too many restrictions, deck building ends up becoming very linear. Instead of picking and choosing which cards may work together the best, you just put in every card that has that archetype name, or that specific keyword that the deck revolves around. The example that comes to mind first is the lurk cards in that game I don't like. But the inverse is also true. If a card is too good and doesn't have enough restrictions on it, then the card will just be put into every deck, run in everything that could run it. And once again, deck building loses some of its complexity. Every deck you build, maybe not every, already has some slots filled in. The card ends up being over-centralizing. To make things easier to understand, I'll borrow a term from the hat simulator I really like. The archetype-specific, restriction-ridden cards, I will call specialist cards. And the cards that are good without restrictions, I will call generalist cards. But right now, I think I'm oversimplifying things, so let's go a bit more in depth. Not every card goes into every deck. With the different deck speeds and resource restrictions, it just either is impossible or makes no sense. There could be an incredible card for control, but an aggro deck has no reason to play it. Even if Defile is a really good card, Zoo Warlock would not play it because it doesn't advance the game plan that the deck is trying to accomplish. So in a way, cards are designed with strategies in mind. Something like Defile is clearly meant for the mid-range to control deck, while a card like Flame Imp is more meant for an aggressive deck. And that's for things like established deck speeds. Aggro needs to go fast and control wants to slow things down. And the same is true with specific archetypes. We don't want to release an archetype that doesn't have enough support to work on its own or without enough cards to execute the strategy. So cards get printed very linearly into specific archetypes. Hearthstone does this a lot, just look at the Demon Hunter quest, wants you to do 2 damage at a time, so we print cards that are good at fulfilling that purpose, but are pretty bad if you're not focusing on it. Seriously, this is still bad. This method of card design does come with pitfalls. If you don't print enough support, then the archetype will fall flat on its face. There are many examples of this, but sticking with the theme, Quest Rogue in the new Ongoro set is a tragedy. Ignoring how terrible and restrictive the reward is for completing the quest, the set did not have enough cards to help you actually complete it. Instead we got this, a card that clogs your hand and makes the reward much worse. And of course, the numerous Yu-Gi-Oh archetypes that get one wave of support then remain unplayable while praying for Konami to breathe life into it. Can we get more Ashen cards, please? That's one issue, but even if there is a perfect amount of support for an archetype or strategy, the deck may still build itself. If you want the strategy or archetype to work, it typically needs a critical mass of cards that support it, which means the deck will need to run these cards, which means less player expression during the deck building process. When Oath of the Gatewatch came out, the Eldrazi were a heavily pushed tribe of cards, and every deck ran 4 copies of Eye of Ugin, 4 copies of Temple, 4 of Thought-Knot, 4 of Mimic, and 4 copies of Smasher. In an attempt to push this archetype, the boys by the bay all but build the deck for us. Specialist cards take away player agency. Don't get me wrong, this certainly falls under the category of players optimizing the fun out of their game, but it should be up to the players how their optimized decks look, not something forced by the developers. Those are the big cons that come with specialist cards. But to be fair, there is a positive that comes with it. If the strategy is unbalanced, it's pretty easy to rectify if it's comprised mostly of specialist cards. Balance outliers will always be apparent, and it's much simpler to weaken these specific strategies without it leaking into other strategies or archetypes. Specialist cards do have downsides. So now let's talk about generalist cards. Sometimes, strong cards aren't printed directly into strategies. Sometimes, strong cards are just printed. The cards come out with few or no restrictions, and it's up to the players to decide how to use the card, what deck the card should go into. We're gonna keep using the Hearthstone example because it's what I've been playing the most. For the last couple of expansions, Blizzard has printed neutral legendary cards that have been so good and splashable that they're able to be ran in many different decks. Most slower decks will just run Xavius, and every single late game deck will be running Ceaseless. Before 2 nerfs, almost every single deck ran some version of Zilliax, and now decks are working hard to fit in Elise. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the monster that has been Monstrous Rage. If you're running a red mana base, you're running Monstrous Rage. It was in every deck in the Pro Tour top 8. Though the top 8 was only 2 decks, I don't want to be misleading, and it needed to be banned. If Magic was a bit more willing to errata, I think the card could have just gone to 2 mana. These cards are here to illustrate a point I want to make. When these generalist cards are strong, they don't make specific decks easier to build. They make lots of decks easier to build. Does this deck plan on going late? Ceaseless is obviously going in. It doesn't impact the lists as much, maybe a card or a playset, but it does take away from the deck building. So why do they print cards like this? Why do they make cards strong in this regard, and why do they make them so narrow as to make them specialist cards? The first one is mostly a balance issue, not something inherently wrong with the design or even the idea of these cards. Specialist cards come with all these downsides, but they also come with a tremendous upside. They're interesting. A new archetype or a new way to approach the game is something that can bring tremendous upside to the game. I won't pretend that it always hits, but it's a worthy risk to take. But in order to introduce something new, you have to restrict it. You have to make cards that support the strategy or archetype. Deck building is hit, but I think it's worth it. And the worry of generalist cards being over-centralizing is just something that will happen. It doesn't matter if a card is only played in one deck, strong cards are strong cards, and the issue is in their balance, not their design. A perfect example of a game that has both specialist cards and generalist cards is Yu-Gi-Oh! The game is mostly about archetypes. Most of the decks are built with a core of one or multiple archetypes. Strong cards that limit their advantage to other similar cards, or restrict you to those cards. It's a specialist game, but there are also generalist cards that can and will fit into every single deck. In this case, it's the hand traps. Due to the speed of the game, every deck needs some form of interaction in order to slow your opponent down, and the specialist cards that you want to run may not provide that for you. So you run something like Ash Blossom. You run something like Infinite Impermanence. Decks are a combination of both generalist and specialist cards, for the most part. And the thing is, while it seems like Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks are just a conglomeration of one pre-built shell with another pre-built shell slotted in, that is a gross over-exaggeration. Deck building comes down to nuance, and the skill expression comes down to specific card choices and ratios in order to create a perfect list. Is it a bit lame that out of 60 cards, you already have 30 of them filled out for you? Yeah, it is, but you still have the last 30 cards for you to fill in yourself. This criticism of design implicates deck building in high-level play, in competitive play, which means for everyone else who aren't optimizing the fun out of the game, it doesn't even really apply. If you don't care about winning, nothing stops you from putting together any combination of cards. And at high-level play, things come down to the smallest, slightest decisions you need to make in card choice. 2 copies or 3 copies, this card or the other. It doesn't matter if a card is a specialist or a generalist, most of the time, most of the lists will be the same, and good cards will be ran regardless. As a developer, you need to hit that perfect balance. You need generalist cards to be good enough to be played, but not too good to eliminate the decision making. And the same is true of specialist cards. That may be even easier because you're theoretically only balancing for one deck. These 2 types of cards both have pitfalls. It's just that the damage that specialist cards can do if executed poorly is much more obvious. Are specialist cards a bit unhealthy? I'd say so. Taking away player agency is almost always a negative thing. Sometimes you need to take away something in order to add something else. But are generalist cards worse? I don't think so. As long as there is some nuance or decision making in the deck building, that's the bare minimum that is necessary. Every deck should be different. And the more agency players have in making sure each strategy is different from the other, the better it is for everybody.